So I was asked a shaila like this. The fellow has a crock pot. We discussed last week that a crock pot needs a blech. We discussed last week how you make a blech in a crock pot. The reason you would need a blech, certainly if you're doing chazara, and even if you're not doing chazara, but if you're doing SHIYA, lichatchila, we're trying to get the shita of the Be'er Halacha. So the Be'er Halacha says that lichatchila, a person wants to get the shita of the Rabbanan, and to make sure that he doesn't leave anything on the fire, on an open flame, al kapanim, what's considered a normal BISHUL tikka flame. He doesn't want to leave something on an open flame that is possibly mitztamik v'yafalai, and therefore he might come to stoke. So we saw that therefore last week we saw you're supposed to have some form of a blech. And last week we explained, you take a piece of silver foil, you put it around the crock pot, and then you lift it off a little bit so that the air can get in, and that would be a very viable blech. So somebody asked me that he has no problem doing this. Canary listens to the shir. He told me he has no problem doing this, but he has a different problem. His issue is that, but he's afraid what's going to be with the knob. The knobs aren't covered. And he said, what, should I just take a piece of silver foil and just like throw it over the knob? Is that enough? The truth is that bad sim, I don't see why that wouldn't be enough. Because saif, it's no different than what we have in our blech, that we cover the knobs. If there's a requirement to cover the knobs, I don't see why this would be any different. Just a moment, Rabbi say, I feel like I'm inside a blech right now. I just walked in from giving a shiur. Let me just turn on my AC. Sorry, Rabbi say. So again, the shaila is, do you have to cover the knobs? We've been discussing that for SHIYA, you have to cover the actual, or you have to do what's considered at least a halachic ketuma for the fire, to be mafchis the chayim, and that shows that you are being mesiach das and that you're not in the cooking process. What about covering the knobs? Now, what's very interesting is that let's start with a different shaila. Perhaps we could be a bit more aggressive and say, maybe covering the knobs is enough, and that's all I have to do. We're discussing last week about covering the inside of a crock pot. Maybe it's enough just to cover the knobs. What would be the lamdis? Maybe you could say like this. In the times of Chazal, there were two things. There's always going to be two things, but the two things were together. In the times of Chazal, when they were dealing with irregular coals in a barbecue, so the heat source, which is also the place where you do the chitui, is all in the same place. So the hesach hadas and the heker, which I show that I'm not in the cooking process, in the times of Chazal was in the same place. I cover the coals. When I cover the coals, what I'm doing is I'm being mesiach das from chitui. I'm being mesiach das, number one, from the place that I am mechata. That's where you would stoke in order to get the flaring up of the coals. So I do a ketima, I do some type of a covering to show that I'm not in the cooking process. That ketima, in essence, is doing two things. It's in the place of the chitui, so you're seeing that it's going to be a constant reminder of his hesach hadas. Perhaps it's not enough a heker, it's not enough just a reminder, but it's a constant reminder of the hesach hadas that he had as when Shabbos came in, because he did a ketuma on this area. Mitzad sheni, it's also doing, it's being moyel to be mafchis the chaim. It's also making the heat not as hot. So in the times of Chazal, where I did the belech, quote unquote, the ketima was in the same place. The chaim was mufchas, was lessened, the heat was lessened, and it's in the exact same place where I have this constant heker, which is in the place of the chitui. By us, in the modern day systems, the knobs, klaimar, the makom to do the actual chitui, are in a different place than the afchasas hachaim. So now we could be aggressive. Maybe we could say it's enough just to cover the knobs. That's also maybe a kiyum of Chazal. When I cover the knobs, in essence, what am I doing? I'm doing something which is definitely shows a level of a hasachas das and a heker, which shows that I'm not interested in the cooking process. If I was interested in the cooking process, so then I wouldn't cover my knobs, which makes it difficult for me to cook. But mitzad sheni, you're not doing it in the way that Chazal shtel levek. how Chazal showed you how you can prove to us that you're Mesiach Das and that you're not involved in the cooking process anymore. And this is the nidain of the Goyin Rav Moshe in the famous Tshuva. By now, I think it's famous in Chelik Aleph and Siman Tzadi Gimel. This is in Dibra Maskul Afiza, where Moshe says, "Aval Vadai." This is Kol HaTorah Kula saying Vadai. The Das Torah for Moshe says, Vadai Zelavad, that if you just cover the knobs and not the fire, that Vadai is not going to work. Because ha'ikr is you have to show har ois shedaita lahafchit shezed near Yosef Bekisei. Says Moshe, when Chazal required a showing of a hasachas das to show that I'm not interested in the cooking process, they said, what's the way which brings out the most that the person is not in the cooking process? When he does something to the flame which shows that he's broken the flame, and he's done something to make it very, very not user-friendly in the cooking. Says Rav Moshe, that all has to be in the way that Chazal shtel the vek to prove it, which is in the heat. So says Rav Moshe, that's the Aleph base, that bevada you must show this as a chadas in the flame. And over here you see it's also not enough a hecker, because LIMAYSEH, it's clearly just a hecker. It's clearly a hecker that I'm gonna remember when I come to actually stoke. I'll remember not to monkey with the knobs, because there's going to be something reminding me. So you see, clearly it's not enough, says the Goyin Rav Moshe, that you have a hecker of a reminder. You have to do the Takana Chazal, which is to be mafchis techayim, which is like we spoke, a blech or silver foil inside the crack pot, as long as it has the air can come in, etc. But now Rav Moshe has a different shaila. Rav Moshe has a shaila, okay, it's not enough the knobs, but perhaps I also need the knobs. In other words, maybe good, we vadai have to make sure that we're mafchis techayim and we put a blech. But now there's another question. Maybe in the times of Chazal, the havchasas chayim, the hesach hadas, the ketuma, was not only in the place of the fire, was also covering up the chitoy. So maybe I need both. For sure, it's not enough just to cover up the knobs. But maybe I also need to cover up the knobs. That's the next need in a Rav Moshe. And this Bemis Rav Moshe Taka says, and Rav Moshe is in that same Dibra Maskul, in Dibra Maskul Afiza, he says, even if you're not covering the knobs, he says, and all you do is cover the fire, he said that was the ikar showing the this shows that he's not in the cooking process, Berega, that he went and he put something on to make it that the heat is not as aggressive. Then he says, Yoiser Toiv to yes, cover the knob, says Rav Moshe, because he says, Ulai Lachash, it's a davar rachak that the person's not going to realize. He said, but in the times of Chazal, the chitui and the heat was all in the same place. So therefore, maybe Chazal required that hesach hadas in the mokem chitui and in the mokem eish. And it's not enough just in the mokem eish, albeit that in the mokem eish is clearly going to advise to us his sincerity that he's not planning on stoking. So Rav Moshe says it's better. That's the psak of Rav Moshe. It's the right thing to go and to cover the knobs. But mitzad adin, it's not. So I was thinking like this, when we're dealing with a challenge, okay, so if we're dealing with a challenge which isn't cooked, then you need a blech maker adin. That's one thing. But many of us, when we're dealing with a challenge, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a challenge which is a third cooked for sure, probably half cooked, and probably even more than that. By the time Shabbos comes in, by the time SHIYA comes in. We just have a blech. Why? So for two reasons. One reason we have a blech is because of the chumrah of the bir halacha, that we want to get the sheet of the rabbanon. And even when something is fully cooked, we want to make sure that it's covered, because mitztamik v'yafaloi, we want to be machmer. But that's a chumrah. That's one reason why we have a blech. If that's the reason why we have a blech, it's just a chumrah. Meikar adin, the Ramah says it's mutter once it's already a half cooked, a third cooked, etc. So then oibazoi, if a zayvite, maybe the person can be meikol. The whole idea of covering the knobs, Rav Moshe says, is a chumrah. And that's in fact that I covered the actual heating element. That already shows I'm mesiach das. To go and make a double chumrah, that I have to cover the knobs on something that's already a chumrah, especially if it's difficult, instead of being makim to be makel. And I said, I don't know what's such a big deal. Take the silver foil and just let it go down and it'll cover the knob. And that'll also be somewhat of a hecker. But if somebody finds it to be a big deal, in an oven that we spoke about last time, it's going to be much more difficult. Because there, even if somehow you can find a way to make a blech on the inside, but then you're going to have to cover the knobs, etc. So therefore, if somebody wants to know in a situation of where it's already half cooked, is he have to cover the knobs? You can say he doesn't have to cover the knobs, even if it would be mamish a case of where Meikra didn't need Shia. It's a chumrah Moshe said to cover the knobs. So in a case where he's being machmir already to do a blech, it's a case where he doesn't really need a blech, like his Michael ben Drusai. So then we could say he could be makel also on the knobs. That's the chayr number one. Elamai, but there's another reason why we need a blech. Let's say you want to do chazara on your challenge, which we haven't learned yet. So you can only return to a covered fire. Here, by say svara, the whole problem of chazara is only going to be a problem of mechzikim avashel. There, it's for sure l'chayra that even Ramosha would agree that you don't need to cover the knobs. For chazara, what's the issue of chazara? It looks like he's cooking. But the issue of Shia is that he's going to come to stoke. So when the issue is he going to come to stoke, so Ramosha said, maybe there's a chumrah to cover the place that you stoke. But Mashen came when the issue is mechzikim avashel, that it looks like I'm going to cook. It looks like he's in the cooking process. He looks like he's actually cooking now. He's putting something on fire. So once he puts it on a covered fire, he returns his cholent, his fully cooked cholent to the fire, which is a covered fire. So then it doesn't look like cooking anymore. It's not necessary to cover the knobs. Covering the knobs is only in the sugya of SHIYA, where the issue is that he's going to come to stoke. Says Ramosha, so maybe it should be machmir to make it that you won't be able to stoke. But the issue of chazar is a totally different issue. It's an issue that it looks like a bishul. If it looks like a bishul, that we can hear that certainly doesn't look any more like a bishul because the knobs aren't covered or covered. Once the fire is covered, it doesn't look like bishul anymore. There's no more mechzikim avashel. I did see something very interesting. I thought I would like this. I saw something very interesting. In the Sefer Aznidbru, he says that you bedavka shouldn't cover the knobs, even by Shia. Ramosha says it's better to cover the knobs. He says you bedavka shouldn't cover the knobs. He says why? Because you're going to come to make a mistake and think it's enough to cover the knobs. And he said that's bevade no good, like Ramosha says. So he said therefore don't cover the knobs. Okay, that's already a chiddush. You see, Ramosha is not like that. I saw another thing. I saw in the Sefer Orcha Shabbos that he says there's a sugya that we didn't learn yet, which is in Siman Reish and Daled, which is the sugya of Toch Petit. There's a whole sugya in the Gemara in Shabbos of Daf Yud Ches that perhaps there's a different way to get out of the whole problem of Shihiyah. If I go and do something and I cement up the oven, that's in their days, they used to cement the oven, and I go and I cement up the oven, which was a type of cement that the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yud Daled says you're allowed to break on Shabbos, also Reish and Tes. But if I go and I cement up the oven in a way where I can't possibly stoke, I push it, cement it around, there was some type of a glue that they put on the oven door and you weren't able to get into the oven. So if I go and do that and I cement the oven, so then there's no issur of shehiyah and you're allowed to leave food that's not cooked. Yeah, cooked anything because we're not afraid. He's not going to come to stoke. By the time he gets through the breaking of the tit, it was called toch betit. By the time he gets through breaking the cement, he's going to remember that, whoa, what am I doing? It's Shabbos AM. We're not afraid of mazid. If we're afraid of mazid, then we can't stop the guy anyways. We're afraid he's going to forget himself. So we're not afraid. I comment that it's toch betit. That's a whole sugya in Reish and Daled. So I saw the Sefer Orcha Shabbos. He says, well, maybe just merely covering the silver foil, gluing it over, putting a piece of tape over the knobs. So that's like toch betit. Because now when he has to first remove the tape and then turn the knob, so he's going to come to remember that, hey, what am I doing over here? So he says, so wait a minute, if I tape shut the knob, so maybe that's toch betit, and it's anyways mutter shehiyah. This rabbi say, lezachisi lahavin, it's mamish tamua to compare a piece of tape on a knob to toch betit, which is a cement, which you have to mamish crack through and everything. I think it's very schwer. At the time, when the Sefer Orcha Shabbos came out, this is going back about close to 20 years. Maybe, close to 20 years. So Rav Scheinberg Zichron Levracha was alive at the time, and I showed it to him, and Rav Scheinberg told me it's not emes, and that Avada, like Rav Moshe, merely covering the knobs, even if you're going to put a piece of tape over the knobs, is certainly not allowed, and it's certainly not enough, and certainly you would still need a blech. Rav Scheinberg at the time, when I was speaking to him, he said you could don if you would actually take off the knob and put it away, put it somewhere else. So then you could don that, maybe that would be called toch betit, because you have to go and take it and put it back on and reconnect it. Okay, even that he wasn't so thrilled with, but that's pashit halacha l'maisa. Taping the knob alone is not okay. Maybe not ad kidei kach like das nidru not to tape it, but certainly if the food is already cooked, Michael ben Drusai, so then you can't say that the person is mechuyev to tape it and mechuyev to cover it up. And even Rav Moshe never said it's mechuyev; he just said it's toiv. So the guy govna, there would definitely be a makom to be mekel. That's Abayisai. is one shaila that comes out of our sugya. Before I go to the Geshmaka shaila that the Olam danned on, which is Katma v'Huvra, I want to tell you what somebody asked me this Friday night, Friday afternoon. And it's Mamashur Sugya, and I'll give the Olam a chance to answer. He asked me, he doesn't want to leave on the fire. He doesn't want to leave on, the stovetop. It's hot and everything. There's so much Kedusha. A fire over here. So he said he doesn't want to leave on the stovetop. So he had an idea. He's going to take, let's say, the chicken soup, or let's say the chicken, or whatever it is, and he'll put it on the stovetop. The fire's off. But there's a little area over there on the stovetop that you could put little tea lights. So he said, I'll put little tea lights under. Those tea lights go out after an hour or whatever, an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is. And then I'm going to have hot food on Friday night. And Shalom Al Yisrael. He asked me, am I allowed to do that? So I told him, look, anyways, what's the shayla? I mean, you're for sure allowed to do that because it's not going to cook the food. So obviously you're only doing this to food which is already cooked. So then you're for sure allowed to, because according to the Shita of the Chananya, which is how we paskin Mikra Din, so then once the food is cooked, or Michael ben Risai, there's no problem leaving on the fire. So he said, no, he's a Talmud Chacham, this Yid. He says, I do like the Biur Halacha, and I always try to make sure that I'm not saimich on the Shita of Chananya, and I try to do like the Rabbanon, that when even it's takem mitztamik v'yafalai, when it's mitztamik v'yafalai, I'm machmir, and I make sure to have a blech. So he asked me, is tea lights a blech? So what does the Olam say? Is tea lights a blech? It doesn't sound like a blech. So what does the Olam say? Sounds pretty bad, no? What do you think, Rabbi Yisai? Tell me 2 words if this is mutter aser. I rarely do this, but I want you to get hanoya. No, let me hear. Mutter aser. You could write. I could, Baruch Hashem, I can see the chat. No, zum ersten Mal, zum zweiten Mal, and zum dritten Mal. So I'm being told over here to hecker. A hecker's not enough. We need an halacha, a hezek hadas. Oh, God bless you, Rabbi Adler. That's what I was thinking also. This is a modern day example in the year 2020. Where are we? 3 or 2 or somewhere? 2. We're 2022 in the Heilige Tufshin Pei Beis. This is a modern day example of kashu gvava. What does kashu gvava? Kashu gvava is a type of material that you can't stoke. You can't do it. The only thing you could do is you could add more oil if you want to your tea light. So you could also add more kashu gvava. We're not afraid of that. Is it a normal way to cook? Definitely not. Is it something that you could stoke? Definitely not. This is kashu gvava. Kashu gvava is mutter. I said, I told him Givaldik. It's a Givaldik. Rabbi Yisai, it's a mitzvah lefarsim this idea. I think people would love this idea. That way you don't have to leave on a fire the whole Shabbos. A lot of times all he needs is Friday night, the chicken, the this, that, whatever. You put a pan, you put it underneath it, the tea lights, you put it on the stovetop, and you put it on the grates, and Shalom Al Yisrael. Rabbi Yisai will be famous. We'll spread this idea around the world. Well, Bamish, unbelievable. That's his number 2. Number 3. Now this Rabbi Yisai, Agishmaka Shaila. No. A Yid, he's listening to this shir, and he's learning the sugya like you guys are learning. You don't even need the shir. You're listening to the words of the Torah, the words of the Mishnah Berurah speaking right to your neshamas.
Can Rav explain the Shaila again? The methodology again, the one that you just said ends up being
tea lights.
Yeah.
Does everybody know what tea lights is, or that's in England? I'm not sure if it's from my wife from England or not. Tea lights they have in America.
Tea lights are the little things.
Those little, yeah.
Like snares. So what would they do?
Little neirlach that they have. So over here, he wants to take the stovetop is off, but now he wants to take a tea light and put it on top of the stovetop on the actual plate, and now he'll put a pot on top of the grate. The fire he'll be using is not the fire from the stovetop. He'll be using the fire from the tea lights. So he'll put 4, 5, 6, 7 tea lights under all of his food. And then the mile of that is after an hour and a half, the fire goes out. He has hot food for Shabbos. And Shalom Yisrael. The question is, does he need a blech? Is this a fire that he's going to need a blech? Kloimar, this is a Yid that wants to be machmer on the sheet of the Rabbanon. And now he wants to make sure that everything's blecht always. So now the whole word of blech was grufa ketuma. What if I have another methodology of that can show that he's out of the cooking process, that he's done a hasech hadas. So we had two ways to do that. We had grufa ktuma, that's 2 shtaim shem arba, and we had kashu gvava. Kashu gvava is the mitzias of an item which you cannot stoke. And it's definitely not the normal way to cook with tea lights. As I bizarre, you found a moifis. You found modern day kashu gvava. Kashu gvava is a Mishnah of Farashas, that's considered something that shows that he's not in the cooking process. So it's a mitzvah of farsim. A goddess man will be famous. will be famous.
Which one? Sternos. The question is, do sternos qualify in the same way?
Okay.
Sternos, the old-fashioned STR.
Okay, so that the chemical stuff that they have.
What?
Okay, if you're talking about the ones that they have at the caterers,
for camping trips. These are for camping for tiulim. No.
No. I think he's talking about the ones that the caterers have.
Oh no, the caterers use the one. That
okay, so that is a parsha, and b'li neder, when we get to, I think we're going to talk about that afterward. It happens to be, sternos could definitely cook. That's for sure. The only question is that maybe we'll don that they have these chemical ones and whatnot that could just go out. We do have to don it, but it's a little bit of a separate child. Meaning Kleimar, it's a bit more involved. It's a bit more involved, but akoponim, tea lights is bevadai going to work. Does it bevadai? So maybe we'll manufacture, a good tea lights.
In Chutz we have 3-day, quote unquote, a 3-day yontif now.
Oh,
so this
3-day yontif is gewaldig, but there's not going to work because anyways you need the hot plate for. Yeah, those ones, the methanol gas and all that I'm going to believe I'm going to talk about. That taka will come back to Bez Hashem. Now, by say, let me get the shaila. Somebody is learning these sugyas. He says, okay, I'm putting a blech in my crack pot. I'm putting in silver foil like we spoke about or whatnot, or baking paper. No problem. Now, this yid comes, and there are people that do this every Shabbos. I'm going to talk about a topic now, which could potentially be a big michshol. And I want the olam to tell me what they think. Every Shabbos, he takes his crack pot, he leaves it in before Shabbos. He has his blech. He says, I'm a bir halacha dikayid, I'm a mishnah dikayid. I don't want to get involved with chananya. I'm going to just make sure I have a blech. Or a crack pot is something that sometimes it's not a third cooked even. So he needs a blech maker adin. He puts his blech in. There are a lot of people, Abayisai, that the silver foil is a little bit annoying to take in, to take out, especially if you got those balls going and whatever. So what does he do? Who cares? It's cooking for the next 20 hours anyways. He takes his crack pot Erev Shabbos. He puts it inside. The silver foil is there. He leaves the silver foil there week to week. He puts inside the cholent, Gevaldik. He puts it on high before Shabbos. Then he puts it on low when Shabbos comes in, like all of us do. Wait a minute. We might have a major problem over here. What's the whole point of your blech? What's the whole point of your blech? The ganze point of your blech, Rabbi Yisai, is to show that you're out of the cooking process. I'm being mafchis techayim that shows I'm out of the cooking process. How did you just show you're out of the cooking process? I'll prove to you you're not out of the cooking process. You cook with this blech, always. So that is normal for you in the cooking process. And if you say you're the only guy that does this, I hear, but I think there's a lot of people that are doing this, Rabbi Yisai. When it comes to a regular blech, nobody does that. Because during the week, you use the fire. Nobody leaves the blech there the whole week. Maybe on Yontif, he leaves the blech because he wants to heat up the food, Adarabah, because, that's why. But nobody leaves the blech there the whole entire week. So you take off the blech on the regular week. Erev Shabbos, you cook up the food, then you put on the blech. Gevaldik. That shows you're not in the cooking process. It shows you're just trying to heat things up and you're not interested in cooking. It shows a hezach hadas. But what happens if you have a person that he actually cooks with the silver foil? Whenever he uses the crock pot, he leaves the silver foil inside. So how did you show us, BISHUL of every Shabbos, you took out the silver foil, and then you first cook the cholent, then you take out the cholent, then you put in the silver foil and show I'm out of the cooking process. I'm being mafchis the chayim, I'm lessening the chayim. I hear. But Rabbi Yisai, a lot of people do. They take the cholent, they put it in the crock pot, which has a silver foil in there, and they leave it there week to week. So you didn't make a blech. You're doing the exact same thing. This is how you cook, right? This is how you started the cooking process. What's this related to? So we all know that the Mishnah brings down in Tivkot Yudalid a phenomenal chiddush. He brings down a chiddush. It's called Katma V'Hovara. Katma V'Hovara, the Gemara says that they had a case of where there was a fire, and you were koitim the fire, you went and covered it up. And then after the fire was badekt, so then it got a revival, and it flared up again. And all the afer was burnt up. So now the Gemara says, Gavaldik Chiddush, that it's still okay. It's still okay. And this is already going to be mutter for Shihiyah. Now this, as you realize, is the biggest raya to what we've been talking about for all the last few weeks, that the gather of the takana, of the tikkun of Chazal, to fix the problem of Shihiyah, is you have to show us your hesach hadas. And it's not enough a hecker. Because if it would be a hecker, where's your hecker? There's certainly no hecker. Once it flared up again on Shabbos, there's a fire over there. So how in the world can I leave this food on the fire, which is flared up? You're going to say because he once did it. But if you need a hecker, there's no hecker right now. This is the raya, and this is how the Mishabur explains it in Sivkot Yudalid, and this is how the Taisa Shabbos tell you, Rabbi the Graz, the Mogen Avram, in Sivkot Gimel, the Aruch HaShulchan, in Sivkot Hey. They all explain it. From here, you see the Yisoid, that the gather of the tikkun of Chazal to fix the problem is to show that I'm Messiach Das. So once I did it, I was already Messiach Das. I did something which normal people in the cooking process do not do. I've proven that I'm not in the cooking process. Who says you have to see it the whole time? That's the Chiddush of Kotma V'Hovra. That's the Chiddush of Kotma V'Hovra. Now, there is an Igros Moshe in Chelik Dalid, in Ayin Dalid, BISHUL Islamid, where he says a bit of a Chiddush. He says that the case of Kotma V'Hovra is not the way I just described it, and that there is still a little remnant of the Ketima. There still has to be a little remnant of the Ketima. But if it would be no remnant of the Ketima, for example, he's talking about a case of where you put a blech on and you put on the pot and then the blech falls off. He says, no, that's not enough because there's no remnant at all. But I must tell you that's not such a pashit zach. Not such a pashit zach, but we'll leave that concept. Right now, I just want to show you the concept of Kotma V'Hovra. Kumt again, the Goyin Rishleim Zalman, in the Shmir Shabbos in Perik Aleph, HaRav Samach Gimel, again in HaRav Reish Yud Zayin. And there's a nice long history about this. This comes from the Tikkunim that everyone knows. Rishleim Zalman worked on Hilchos Shabbos for 7 years, and he wrote a Orez on the Sefer Shmir Shabbos Hilchos, and that was the Tikkunim V'Meluim that came out about 25 years ago or something like that. No, what 25? 35, excuse me. 35 years ago. It came out the Tikkunim and Miluim, Tikkunim that he made on the Sefer Shmir Shabbos. In the Tikkunim, so Shlomo Zalman says like this. He says, Yesh lahakbid, tell me if this sounds familiar. He says, Yesh lahakbid, you have to be careful that once you already put on the blech, forget my case of the silver filament. Once you already put on the blech, says Shlomo Zalman, you have to be careful not to put down the fire. Excuse me, not to put up the fire. We'll see if putting down is the same, but he says you have to be careful not to monkey with the fire, not to be putting up the fire. Why? Says the Shlomo Zalman, what's the whole vort of a blech? The whole vort of a blech is that you're showing me you're not in the cooking process, and that so now the guy has a blech, and it's covering the fire, and what does he do? He goes and he monkeys with it. So what are you showing me you're not in the cooking process? You showed me you are in the cooking process. If the whole lumdis is to make a hesach hadas, that's the ganze lumdis, is to show me that you're not in the cooking process. By the fact that even after you put on the blech, you're playing with the knobs. So then you're showing me you're not in the cooking process. So maybe if, you have one of those blechs that covers the knobs, and in order to, monkey with the knob, you have to pick up the whole entire blech, and then you change the knob, and then you put it back down. So maybe I could look at that, that he's putting it back down. That's called he's covering the fire now. But a lot of times, everybody say, you could play with the knobs without removing the blech. For example, by saying a crock pot. It's covered. You have a blech in there. The way we described, you cover it all around, and on the bottom there's a couple little balls. And now you go and you change the knob. Sometimes you go from low to high, sometimes low to high to low, etc. Now it is true that when you go from high to low, you're not really showing me that you're in the cooking process. You're showing me that you're getting out of it. If you go from low to high, you're showing me I'm not Messiach Das. But even that is not so pashut. You see, I'm still monkeying with the fire, and that this doesn't show that I'm not involved. This is why the Goyin Rishon Mazaman says, Yishlahakbid, not to raise the fire after you put on the asbestos. I don't know what asbestos is, some type of unhealthy thing. But after you put on the blech, And he says, it wouldn't be called a ktuma. He says, don't think this is like katma v'hovra. Katma v'hovra is it happened on its own, but not that you went and flared it up. If you flare it up, so that shows you're not in the cooking process. This is what the Goyin Rishon Mizaman said. Now, Baisai, in the Tikkunim and Meluim, it's very interesting. In the original volume of the Shmir Shabbos in Parak Aleph Ha'aron and Dalid, it said Toiv lahachmir. It's kedai to be machmir on this. And what I just said, not the monkey with the fire. Once already you put down the blech. But in the Tikkunim and Meluim, when Rosh Hashanah rethought what was in the Sefer Shmir Shabbos, there he wrote the words Efsher Toiv lahachmir. So the Sefer Ma'ora Shabbos, in page such a Gavaldik Kavod HaTorah, you see every word. In the page 582 of Me'ara Shabbos, he asked Rosh Zalman, why did you say Toiv La'achmir? But now you're saying only maybe Toiv La'achmir. What changed? So he writes back, Rav Moshe, Rav Shlomo Zalman, he writes back, what should I tell you? He says, it's true, I changed, that it's only maybe Toiv La'achmir, because I heard that the Baal Igros Moshe is matir. Baal Igros Moshe. Rav Shlomo Zalman changed from a Toiv Lachmer to an Efshar for the Baal Igros Moshe. They're going to Moshe. They asked Rav Shlomo Zalman once, how do you not have gaiva? You walk into a chasana there, everybody stands up and singing and dancing for hours and this and that. Actually, for 3 minutes. That's all Rav Shlomo Zalman had to be there for. Rav Shlomo Zalman said, that's gaiva? He said, that's not gaiva. He said, I had gaiva one time. He said, one time in the middle of the night, I get a phone call. It's Feinstein, ich habe Shaila. It was probably that Chalon bone Shaila, which we'll talk about one day. He said, doesn't the einzige move in mein ganzer Leben wissen, ich habe gehabt Gaiva. When Feinstein called, and the Goyin Rav Moshe, the Baal Igros Moshe called. So the Baal Igros Moshe, he heard a shmua from the Baal Igros Moshe that you can maybe raise the flame even after you put the blech on. Maybe. So that was enough for him to say it's only a maybe chumrah. Interesting. The Goyin Rav Elyashiv makes a very interesting chilik. I saw in the Shvis Yitzchak, in page 26, in page 109, also 26. In the Shvis Yitzchak chilik Beis, he asked the Shal to Rav Elyashiv, and Rav Elyashiv made a very interesting chilik. He said that there's a chilik if you're dealing with a real blech, a proper blech, or silver foil. Rav Elyashiv says it's true that silver foil works as a blech, because even a little bit takes away a little bit of chayim. He says, but there's a gewaldige chilik. I'll read you his words. He says, he says, when it comes to a blech, which is totally not normal way of cooking, and you play with it, and I guess he means like this, like about the Erev Shabbos, you have to cook the food on the fire. And then afterwards, you have to put on the blech. So we could look at this as even if he's monkeying with the fire after he puts on the blech, but we could look at this, we could view it as all one big, getting the Hesach Hadas over here. I put on the blech, I'm making sure that it's arranged the right heat amount, but it's one long process of, I'm not in the cooking process, because he already cooked the food on the fire. And then after he cooked the food on the fire, now he has to put on a blech. So, okay, so if he changes it afterward, nishkaferlich. Okay, Masha Einkein, in our case that we were describing, or I understood from Rav Elyashiv, in the Sefer, it's a little bit bekitzer, but I understood from Rav Elyashiv, Masha Einkein, if you're dealing with a silver foil inside a crock pot, there, avada, that's a problem. Avada, that's a problem. People can cook like that. Varaya, people do cook like that. And when they're putting in the cholent, a lot of people just leave the silver foil like that because it's something that doesn't bother people. So then that for sure, if you're going to be playing and monkeying with the knobs back and forth, avada, you're showing us that this isn't a raya, that you're not in the cooking process. So therefore, this, I believe, is a very big problem. When it comes to tea lights, you will be famous for the tea lights, that's mutter. When it comes to leaving the silver foil inside your crock pot, that I believe is mamash and iser. If you're leaving it in and putting in the crock pot, how are you showing us a hezach hadas? You're not in any way. You have to take it out each time and then put it back in right before Shabbos. I don't know what to tell you. It sounds like a chumrah. It's a little bit bothersome to people, but I don't know.
Unless you cover the knob, would that work?
No, but it won't help if he's still going to be. If he's going to leave in the cholent from the beginning and he's monkeying with the knobs. Covering the knobs of lane, Rav Moshe taught us doesn't work. Even covering them in the first place, we said is a chumrah. But certainly covering them themselves is not enough.
Because the monkeying with it is mevatel, the covering of it. That's the
So 100%. What are you showing me? You're not in the cooking process. You started the cooking process with the silver foil inside. How are you showing me you're not in the cooking process? This, I believe, Rabbi Tzai is mamish a serious thing.
Why can't we say it's in your das that when Shabbos comes, you're not monkeying with it anymore?
Okay.
You're going to go before Shabbos. That's what she is all about. It's before Shabbos.
Yeah, but you never did something to be mafres the choyin in a way that one does when he's not in the cooking process. Because this is the same thing you do when you cook.
Right. You're not gone. You're still there all the way. That's the bottom line.
Come again?
No, so you see, Rav Shlomo is after you finish moving the knob, you cover it again. So maybe why isn't the covering again a hecker? That's his question.
That's stamza you have to know, which maybe we have to talk about next time. How does it work? That's a chadas that my wife is doing it. Who says I have a chadas? So then you say whoever's in charge is working on behalf of everybody. I'm the boss, but she's the bala boss. When you have to know what's going on in each of your houses, right? But the truth is, there's a more scientific question you can clear based on all this. What happened? I'll just mention it now that the Olam's asking within this type of logic. Everybody say, what happens? You go to shul the Shabbos and you start talking to somebody. He says to you, "What are you learning?" You tell him, "I'm learning SHIYA." Das ist mamish. People think it's a hard sugya. Das ist the Geschmack der Sugya in the ganze Welt. Right? He tells you, what's this whole SHIYA about? You tell him, what do you mean setting up a blech on Erev Shabbos and the whole thing and this and that? He says, who doesn't know that a blech is fine because you have a hecker and that's it. It reminds you not to do things on Shabbos and whatever and this that. Hey, wait a minute. What did you just say? It's a hecker. What do you mean it's a hecker? Yeah. It's like a reminder not to stoke or this or that, or not to monkey with the fire, this, that. So you say, really? Is it enough to just put up a sign that says it's Shabbos? He says, no, there's a takanas chazal or something like that. And you have to have a hecker or something like that. Okay. You know what? Rabbi say, he wasn't Mesiach Das. He just told me, I don't know the lumdus of the sugya. He tells me, am I still in the cooking process? He says, yeah, I'm still in the cooking process, but I'm going to have something when I want to come and cook that's going to remind me not to cook. He doesn't know the lumdus. I'll be more aggressive. Maybe he'll say, nah, come on. So that's also a form of Esach Hadas. He's doing something which is going to be a hecker later on that'll remind him not to stoke. That itself, even if he doesn't realize the lumdus, that shows that he's not in the cooking process. But wait a minute. Let's say you go over to somebody, and this is a LIMAYSEH Shahaya. You ask him, why do you have a blech on Shabbos? He tells you, I have a blech. It's the greatest thing because it spreads the heat evenly all around. And that way I could put up more pots and it's mamish convenient. And that way I can cook better. It's great, right? You tell him, wait, you have the blech on in order that you can cook better. He says, yeah, right? You ask him, are you out of the cooking process? He says, mamish not. Look, I'm able to even be cooking on Shabbos without doing anything wrong. This guy thinks that the function of a blech is to help him cook on Shabbos. It's really the exact opposite. It's to show you're not in the cooking process. So now, if the lumdus of a blech is not exeris akasiv, the lumdus of a blech is it has to show he's Mesiach Das. This guy just told me first, the blech doesn't know anything, right? Or better, let's say you go to this fellow and you ask him, what's the purpose of a blech? He says, just like when my wife and my baba and my mama, they go like this and they put their hands to bring in the Kedusha Shabbos, and right. So what we do is we put on a blech, and that shows us that the Kedusha Shabbos is permeated over the entire oven, and not only that, it's also a skula that on Shabbos, there'll be shalom bayis and all types of things, and all of these things, Rabbi Isai, you'll hear. No, he doesn't know the lumdus of a blech. He doesn't know the lumdus of a blech. He's not Mesiach Das from the cooking. So would you say in such a case that if the person doesn't know the lumdus of a blech, then maybe the blech doesn't work for him? So they asked this question to the Goyin Rav Elyashiv. I'll read you what he said. Let's say he doesn't know it's coming to be mekel. Kloimar. Rav Elyashiv was mechalik between two types of people. There's one person, says Rav Elyashiv, that you ask him, what's the purpose of the blech? And he starts telling you all types of interesting lakshin, but I know with this, it's now mutter to do what I did. I don't know why, or he starts telling you all types of weird things. but he knows there's a problem, and he knows this fixes the problem. So then Rabbi Yasher said that would be okay. That would be okay. He doesn't know the reason for it, but he knows it's coming to be matir. But the Rabbi Yasher says, if he doesn't know it's coming to be matir, he just puts it on because kedei lite and love kedeiris, that he can get more and more pots on it. He said that's not called ketuma. That's not called ketuma. How could you call that ketuma? Ketuma means that he's showing us I'm not in the cooking process. Now it's a pella. I didn't see anyone that argues on this, Rabbi Yashiv. The only person I saw that brings this down is the Shvitz Yitzchak in the 21st page, and he brings down this, and he doesn't bring anybody fighting about this. So I don't know, but I guess it's not only it's not only important to learn Shia not to be an Amaretz, but in this case, it's mamish an issur to be an Amaretz. If you don't know the Lamdis, right, which brings us to the Shaila that the Olam was asking, can I be goyref and kaitim for somebody else? And that you can hear that already, Avada, once there's one person that showed us a chadas, so then the cooking process has been established in this house is over. You know, what happens? I don't know. What happens if the wife was asleep? And the husband said, you know what, let her sleep. She works hard. I light the candles. I don't know how many women are going to be happy with this, but I'll light the candles and I'll put all the food on and I'll do everything. Right? She wakes up. What's going on here? It's already dark outside. Don't light the candles. Right? And you ask her, you know, what's going to be? She said, I got to cook the stuff for Shabbos. So, you know, in that case, but she relies on her husband, and her husband was Mesiach Das, so that'll be enough. But if she does, if the wife doesn't know the lumdis and she thinks she's putting on the blech because, you know, fakir, it makes it easier for me to have fire everywhere. That way I get more maximum usage of my fire. Rav Yasha says that's not a blech. It's not a blech. Peldik Maisa. Okay. Let him again.
Saying that Rav Yasha says that if a lady doesn't know, doesn't have kavana on the blech, does Hesish come blech?
No, if she does, not the word that she doesn't have kavana. If she thinks that the purpose of the blech is to help to have more fire, right? Yesh Laden in my cases, she thinks it brings in the kedusha of Shabbos and that we have more fire everywhere, and it brings out the fire in my neshama. And I can go on for hours, Rabbi said, but nobody wants me to, right? And it can bring out all the other lukshin that she's talking about, right? So then in that case, she has no idea what she's doing, right? So in other words, there's three levels here. There's one level of where, you know, she doesn't know the exact lumdis. She holds like a certain shittas rishonim that it's a hecker. No, that's nish gefährlich, because then she knows that it's doing a heter. And even though you could say, but she doesn't know it's Mesiach Das and shows them not in the cooking process. For Karen, she requires a hecker on Shabbos. That you can hear, but she did something that's going to make it that she's for sure not going to stoke. So that called she's Mesiach Das. That's level one. There's the other extreme of where she's doing the exact opposite. I think it's there to give me more fire and more heat and to enable me to cook better. That's the exact opposite. How could you say it works? Then there's something in the middle. She's doing it because there's two middles. One is she's doing it because she knows it makes Shabbos mutter.
The Baal Tshuva, they told her she needs to put. She's a Baal Tshuva. They told her to put a piece of metal on her.
It's good shaila. So again, if she's doing it because she's a Baal Tshuva and she says they put it there, when you do this, you're allowed to leave the food on. That's okay, says Rav Yasha, because then you know that you're doing something to matir. Okay, nish gefel, which is a chiddush.
Only that
but
negative
she
category.
Thinks that she's doing it because you know the radiance of Shabbos, the kedusha of Shabbos. So what kind of hesach is that? What does that have to do with anything? It's a very big chiddush is this.
It's a big chumrah because that would require all basic active schools.
Go ask this girl. Go ask her, Geveret, why don't you stoke the fire? She says, I would. Big deal. Just pick it up and go like this. So why did you put the thing on? I do it. What do you mean? Why do I do it? I do it because, you know, because do you understand that when the fire is out, it's the same way my neshama is springing forth on Shabbos, and it has to be blocked by the guf and gashmias of a kishka. Okay, I can go on, Rabbi say nobody wants me to. So too, that's the purpose of the blech, is to show that my neshama springt so happy. Ich will so happy, the fire so kimt arois and dos. Okay, everyone's going to go home and ask his wife, why do we have a blech? L'chaim. I don't know. The pellet to me is that I didn't see anybody that argues on this. It sounds like, I don't know. One thing is borrow. You should go home and teach your wife the whole sugya tonight, Rabbi Yisai. That's for sure.
Okay. We're going to convene an emergency session to teach the virus.
Emergency, yeah. We're going to have a women's emergency, a good get together. We're going to have to send out an email. This is a mamish. Shasatchak. What's weiter, Rabbi Isai? No, let me get weiter. Let me ask you all a very interesting shayla. Very interesting shayla. So first of all, I just want to tell you, Bekitzer, something that I keep on saying the whole time. Is it shlish b'shulai? Is it a third? Is it a half? I just want to read you that the Rashi Shita is Michael ben Yusai is a third. The Mechaber in Reish and Daled Siv Bey says Chatzi. And the Psak is like the Mishnah Berurah in Siv Katan Lamed Ches and Siv Katan Men Gimel, where he says also in the Hakadama, B'makom atchak efshel hakel. So that's why I keep on saying a third, a half, B'makom atchak efshel hakel. I want to give you something to think about. This is something we're going to come back to. It's something that comes up often. How do you figure out a third, a half, whatever it is? How do you figure out a third, a half? It's a third of the time that it takes to cook this item? Or is it a third of the actual becoming cooked? Now, it's very mistaber, and there's two different worlds here, Abba Yisai. The first, you can have something that it takes an hour and a half to cook, and everyone knows that until an hour, it's totally inedible. But 2/3 of the cooking time have gone by already. So how do you don this? Do you don this in the quality of the item or the quantity of time? I would have thought that in Svara, at what point am I not sehitzt? I would have thought if I see I could eat it, it's probably totally in the lumdus of why is it that Michael ben Yusai Hanani was Mekel. If the lumdus is because I see at 1/3 already I could eat it, b'diavad, if I have no choice, I'll eat it. And so then, no, it's not worth stoking because in the end of the day, I'll have food. Right? So then avad, it's got to be somewhat edible at a third. And that would obviously be when we say a third, we mean in the quality of the item, which would be much later. That means an hour had to have gone by until it's mutter. Masha'inkein, if you learn that the lumdus of Michael ben Yusai is that at that point, I'm not nervous because at that point, I know for sure that it'll get cooked in enough time. So then it could be that once a half an hour goes by, a third of the time goes by, I'm not worried. It's only another hour. I'd say in Pashtus, we would have all thought probably it's in the quality of the item. And the Marshag in Chelik Beis Simin Kufayin Ches, he Be'emes says that. And so too the Kafachayim in our Simin Kaf Ches says, the nearly Didon Ein Bekiyim, we're not sure. Yesh Leit Shire, Kol Shenechel Al Yidei Atchak. He says, you got to make sure that's edible Al Yidei Atchak. So he's clearly not going with time. The Chazanish in Simin Lamadayin Sivkat and Vav, he says a phenomenal chiddush. He says it all goes after the time. He's obviously learning that at that point, once it's already a third cooked, a half cooked, whatever, I'm not worried. It's going to get there. I'm not worried, even though there's no way I could eat it right now. That's the chiddush of the Chazanish. Unbelievable chiddush. Now, I'm going to be Messiahim with one thing I want the item to think about. And then maybe we'll talk about this next time, perhaps. I want them to think about this. Somebody asked me a great shayla, the most simple shayla in the world. He asked me, when we talk about mitztamik v'yofaloi and mitztamik v'raloi, is it up to me? What I consider mitztamik v'yofaloi, meaning kloimar, is it something that I would want to stoke because I would want it to be heated up? And mitztamik v'raloi is something that I am not interested in it getting better and better. I'm happy the way it is. Or is it something that we have to look at the Welt? That's the shayla. Do we look at the Welt? Or do we look at, you specifically, what you consider to be mitztamik v'yofalai? And it can be very major. Let's say, I don't know, water is the only thing we know for sure is mitztamik v'ralai. Because the more you stoke the water and it gets heated, you just lose water. So you have no more water. Everything else I could clear. Chicken soup. I don't know, when you stoke, it gets hotter. For some people, they don't want that because then they're going to lose chicken soup. Other people say, no, fakir, then the taste of the chicken, it's a klepsa mer, and it's more and more, of the etzim chefts of the chicken, and I don't know what. No. So who do we go after? Do we go after you, or do we go after the Welt? Okay? Abay say, does anybody have a riot to the shayla? It's very interesting. In the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkat Ches, I'll read you the Mishnah Berurah's lashon. He sounds like, don't worry. It's very simple. The Pirish, what's mitztamik v'raloi? Kol davar she'odam otsev, anything that you're sad about when it happens, like water, you're sad when it dries out because you lose. That's raloi. Yafaloi is hainu shusameach mizeh. If you're sad about the reaction of more heat, that's called radloi. If you're happy about the reaction of more heat, that's called yafaloi. No, and I'll ask you another shaila. There's nothing in between. There are things that I'm not happy, sad. What do we do? How do we figure all this out? So I'm going to tell you something, which is to me muchach beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now that's the oilam. There's a bir halacha in the beginning of the siman. He has a long bir halacha, whom it's stomach viralai, going back and forth and talking about this food, that food, this food, that food, and he's getting involved in every single food and discussing if it's ralai or if it's yafalai. What is the bir halacha doing? Why do I care? His raya is from Gemaras. If something is ralai, yafalai, he's talking about kemach, he's talking about this. What do I care what's going on in the Gemara? What do I care what's going on? How can the bir halacha be machri? It's up to me. It's up to me. If to me it's yafa, if I'm somebody that, for example, I know the secret of chicken soup because I wanted it to be a more concentrated chicken, so then it's yafalai, and then I'm at risk that I am going to go and stoke. Mashen Kane, let's say I'm somebody that I don't really care. I just want to have more and more soup. I'm losing soup. Then for me, it's ralai. So how's the Mishnah Berurah bringing back and forth rayas and a whole arichas and discussing what's the din of this food and that food and bringing gemaras? What gemaras? It's up to you. Go and figure out that you're happy if you're going to stoke or not. At the end, the Bir Halacha brings down from the El Yerabba. He says, we're not so clear on certain things, what's mistamik v'yafalai. And then he says, sai b'sai, therefore you have to be machmir. What do you mean we're not so clear and we have to be machmir? Ask me. Ask me. What do you mean you're not clear? I am clear. He has a whole question over here about daisa, we're not clear, lefes, and all these things. Those are the things that we are clear about. He says all the other things we're not clear about. What do you mean you're not clear? So you're not clear, but I am clear. So it's barer 100% in the Bir Halacha that the gather of Raloi and Yafaloi is clearly Tali in the Welt. And it's clearly Tali in the world. It's not Tali in me and what I consider Raloi and what I consider Toifloi of Adonai. And that's why the Bir Halacha has this big arichas and trying to figure out, I guess, like all Takanas Chazal, they have to make a standard across the board. So therefore, it seems to be pashit. There's no shaila. L'chayr, it's pashit. The mistamik v'rala. You're going to have to do surveys, I guess. I guess we're going to have to call up not the Rav. We're going to have to call up the cook and find out if this thing is yafalai or ralai. I don't know. It's kugel today. The Welt eats these overnight kugels, so maybe it's yafalai. I don't know. But you're going to have to find out, and it's not up to me and you. But I saw some achreinim, they say, wait, but the Sharetzian in Sivkat and Tess is not like that. Because in Sharetzian, Sivkat and Tess, the Sharetzian says that the Chiddush is, Lashmeinu afilu tavshel, be'etzim yafla. He says, look, you can even have something that be'etzim, it is yafeh, and it's something that does get a benefit when you would stoke, because it would taste better, but Adam Atzov, but the person is sad because he's losing out because he has guests. So says the Mishnah Berurah, if a person has guests, so then for that person, it's going to become, even though normally it's mistamik v'yafalai, but it'll become mistamik v'ralai. So I saw some achreinim, they want to say, oh, so you see, it's tali in each person. Because when the person has guests, you see that by him it became mistamik v'ralai. Because he doesn't want to lose, he needs more food. Mashenkin, if he didn't have guests, it would be called mitzvah v'yafalai. So I saw one sefer brings down. Look, you see from over here that it's totally in each and every person. But the Rabbi says it cannot be. The Bir Halacha is beyond the shadow of a doubt, not like this. So what's the answer? If I didn't have 3 minutes, I would let the oilam answer. But so if you want, you can turn off the recording right now and listen later on. Right? The answer is pashit. The answer is that every person in the situation of having get avada goes basa the Welt, and avada, it's what does the Welt consider to be yafaloi and raloi? Oh, thank you, Rabbi Framowitz. Rabbi Framowitz says that every person that has guests, for him, that is all the people in the Welt also would consider this to be raloi. So therefore, that's also avada. It's totally in the Welt. The factors that we factor in could be factors that are applicable to this type of a person that has guests. But if you want to know if something is yafaloi or raloi, we have to look at the Welt. It could be that when you have guests, you're a type of person in the Welt, everybody that would have guests. But we're not going to go and look at each and every person's specific taste buds to be kaveya, yafalai, or ralai. This Rabbi Isai is the basic sugya. What comes out today is covering the knobs is definitely not enough by itself. Do you have to cover the knobs? The Chatchila says the guy in LIMAYSEH. We saw a kula maybe for a case of where we're anyways being machmir. Then we saw the Gevaldike Eitzah, and this is going to make us famous. Tea lights, that's the Eitzah. Gevaldik, then you don't have to leave on the blech. Then we saw that you have to go home and teach your wife the lumdis. Number one, you have to make sure that you're not leaving the silver foil in every week, because then bevada, you're not showing us that you're not in the cooking process. Number two is you have to go home and teach your wife the whole lumdis of the sugya, that she should know she's Mesiach Das. If you're not Mesiach Das, then what's the point? And the third thing we're seeing, another third thing we saw was that again, the Michael ben Yisai, the Chatchila, we do one half, B'di'evet, a third. What is Michael ben Yisai? Is it the time or is it the quality? That's a Machlekes Chazanish and the Kafachayim. The Shein Halachas brings down the Chazanish, that shita that it's Tali Taka in the time, which is a very big chiddush. It's a kula to a certain extent. And the last thing we saw was what's the gather of mitzvamik v'yafla? Does it go after you? Or does it go after the Welt? The Bialoch is borrowed that it goes after the Welt. We have a liberality in explaining what's the Welt, not only what your taste buds. Avada, the taste buds is the Welt. But if the Welt would agree to this mitzias, because the Welt has orchim, and they would also consider it raloi, then that would be considered what the Welt would consider raloi.
Okay, Yeshchai HaRav. Next week, we'll talk to you offline. Next week, we would like to do a few days of Inyonei Chag HaShavuos. If we could be Matriach HaRav to let us know, we can get a topic on Minhagim Rolachis of the Yontiv of Shavuos. Okay, we'll just let you know